Deep beneath the corrugated metal floor of his ramshackle repair shop, something ancient stirred in the flooded foundations of New Venice. The pipes, those faithful iron arteries that had served him for 23 years, began to sing. Not the familiar groaning melody of thermal expansion or the whispered complaints of mineral buildup, but something else entirely. Something that made his weathered hands pause over the wrench he'd been turning. Something that sent ice threading through his veins despite the perpetual humidity that clung to everything on Aquatica Prime. Finn Morrison had always been able to hear what the water wanted to tell him. His father called it a gift before the rising seas claimed their old world. His mother called it madness before she drowned trying to save their basement workshop. But Finn knew better than both of them. Water didn't lie. And right now, every drop in his shop was screaming. The first pipe burst at exactly 3:47 in the morning. Finn bolted upright in his cot behind the workshop, the sound of rushing water mixing with something far more disturbing, a rhythmic pulsing that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. In the darkness, phosphorescent algae that had colonized every damp surface began to glow with unusual intensity, casting everything in an otherworldly blue-green light that made his small sanctuary feel suddenly alien, suddenly dangerous. "Kara," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing cacophony. But his 17-year-old niece was already awake, her slight frame silhouetted in the doorway between their living quarters and the shop proper. Her dark eyes, so much like her mother's, so much like his sister's before the plague ships took her, reflected the eerie luminescence with an intelligence that often unnerved him. "Uncle Finn," she said, and her voice carried a tremor he'd never heard before. "The water, it's not behaving normally." That was Kara's way, clinical, precise, even when terror should have been clawing at her throat. She'd been analyzing fluid dynamics since she was 12, coding water management systems since 14, dreaming in algorithms and differential equations, while other teenagers dreamed of dry land and surface cities. But tonight, even her analytical mind seemed shaken by what they were witnessing. The second pipe burst as Finn stepped into the workshop, and this time he saw it happen. The reinforced carbon steel conduit simply opened. Not a clean break, not the jagged tear of metal fatigue, but an organic flowering, as if the pipe itself had chosen to bloom like some metallic flower. Water poured out, but not in the chaotic spray he expected. Instead, it formed perfect spirals in the air, defying gravity, defying physics, defying every law of fluid dynamics he'd spent his life mastering. "This is impossible," Kara breathed, her tablet already in her hands, sensors extended, trying to measure what couldn't be measured. "The pressure readings don't match the flow patterns, and the water. Uncle Finn, the water is moving upward." Indeed it was. Rather than pooling on the floor, as any sensible liquid should, the escaped water was forming a column, a vertical river that twisted and danced in the phosphorescent light. Within its flowing embrace, shapes began to form, suggestions of faces, hints of architecture, glimpses of something vast and beautiful and utterly alien. The third pipe burst, and with it came the voice. "Keeper of waters," it said, though said was inadequate for what Finn experienced. The words seemed to flow directly into his consciousness, carrying with them the weight of ocean depths and the pressure of unspoken desperation. "Healer of the deep channels, we have need." The water column began to solidify, taking shape with a precision that made Finn's mechanical mind reel. First came the outline, humanoid but elongated, graceful in ways that spoke of a lifetime spent navigating liquid environments. Then came the details, skin that seemed to shift between pale blue and silver depending on the angle of observation, hair that moved as if perpetually underwater, and most striking of all, facial features that managed to be both beautiful and utterly alien. She, for the voice and form were unmistakably feminine, stood nearly 7 feet tall, with limbs that seemed to flow rather than simply bend. Gill slits along her elegant neck opened and closed in a rhythm that suggested breathing, though Finn couldn't imagine what she might be extracting from the humid air of his workshop. Her eyes were the color of deep ocean trenches, dark and full of secrets, and when she looked at him, he felt as though he were drowning in their depths. "You are the one they call the Hydro Tinker," she continued, and now her voice carried the sound of distant waves against unknown shores. "The mender of broken waterways, the whisperer to reluctant pipes. Finn found his voice at last, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "Lady, I fix plumbing. That's all. I'm nobody special, just a man with some tools and too much time spent listening to water complaints." A smile crossed her features, or what he thought might be a smile, though her facial expressions didn't quite map to human emotions. "Modesty becomes you keeper. Your reputation travels the deep channels, flows with the tidal currents that connect all waters. We know of your work on the mainland pumping stations, your innovations in pressure regulation, your instinctive understanding of hydraulic mysteries that confound others." Kara stepped forward, her scientific curiosity apparently overriding her fear. "You're not human," she said with her characteristic directness. "Your bone structure, your respiratory system, the way you're manipulating water density to maintain cohesion. You're aquatic, aren't you?" The being turned her attention to Kara, and that alien smile deepened. "Perceptive child. Yes, I am what your kind might call aquatic, though we prefer terms that honor the deep places, the sacred currents that flow between worlds." She paused, and for a moment her composed expression flickered, revealing something that looked very much like desperation. "I am Queen Nerys of the Coral Throne, sovereign of the Abyssal Gardens, keeper of the Deep Treaty, and I am running out of time." The phosphorescence in the room pulsed brighter, and Finn realized that the strange light wasn't coming from the algae at all. It was emanating from Queen Nerys herself, a bioluminescent display that spoke of emotional states he couldn't begin to understand. Around her, the water column began to show images, vast underwater cities built from living coral, their spires reaching toward a surface that seemed impossibly far away. Gardens of kelp that swayed in artificial currents, their fronds sheltering creatures that defied terrestrial taxonomy. And everywhere, the signs of a civilization in decline, structures crumbling, gardens withering, inhabitants moving with the sluggish despair of a people watching their world die. "My city," Nerys said, and her voice carried the weight of millennia. "Nethes Tar, the crown of the deeps, home to 3 million souls who have never known the touch of surface air. For 10,000 years, we have maintained the great purifiers, the systems that keep our waters clean, our people healthy, our coral cities alive and growing. But something is wrong, Keeper. Something is killing us from within." The images in the water column shifted, showing massive mechanical structures that seemed to grow from the living rock of the ocean floor. These were clearly the purification systems Nerys spoke of, a blend of organic and technological elements that boggled Finn's mechanical mind. Biomechanical filters the size of buildings processed countless gallons of seawater, while symbiotic organisms worked in harmony with crystalline matrices to remove toxins and maintain the delicate chemical balance necessary for aquatic life. "The systems are failing," Nerys continued, and now the images showed the same structures in various states of decay, not through age or neglect, but through sabotage. Someone, or something, has introduced elements into our filters that our biomechanical systems cannot process. The water grows more toxic each day, and our people are beginning to die. Finn studied the images with growing fascination and horror. The engineering was unlike anything he'd ever seen, but the principles were familiar enough. Water in, toxins out, balance maintained through careful calibration of biological and mechanical processes. It was plumbing on a scale he'd never imagined, but plumbing nonetheless. "Why come to me?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "You must have your own engineers, your own repair specialists." "We do," Nerys admitted, "but they are steeped in traditions that span millennia. Their knowledge is vast, but inflexible, bound by protocols established before your species learned to work metal. What we need is someone who thinks differently, someone who understands water not just as a medium, but as a living system that can be coaxed, persuaded, convinced to flow where it is needed most." She gestured, and the water column showed new images, technical schematics that hurt to look at directly, their geometry seeming to twist in impossible ways. "Our purifiers are hybrid systems, part living organism, part crystalline matrix, part mechanical apparatus. The sabotage has introduced elements that disrupt all three components simultaneously. Traditional repair methods address only one system at a time, but the damage is systemic, interconnected. We need someone who can see the whole, not just the parts. Kara had been studying the schematics with intense concentration, her fingers flying over her tablet as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. "Uncle Finn," she said slowly, I think I understand what she's asking. The purification system isn't just plumbing. It's a closed-loop ecosystem, like the water treatment plants back on Earth, but evolved over thousands of years to include biological components we've never seen before. Finn nodded slowly. He'd always known that the best plumbing wasn't just about moving water from point A to point B. It was about understanding the entire system, the way pressure and flow and temperature all work together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. And if Queen Nerys was right, if someone was deliberately sabotaging these systems, then they were essentially poisoning an entire civilization. "What makes you think I can help?" he asked. "I work with pipes and pumps, not whatever those things are." Nerys stepped closer, and Finn caught a scent like ocean breeze mixed with something floral and alien. "Because," she said, "you have already solved a problem we thought impossible. 3 years ago, the mainland pumping stations began failing. Yes, the water table was dropping, the pressure systems were collapsing, and your surface cities were facing drought conditions that would have killed millions." Finn remembered. It had been the worst crisis of his career, a puzzle that had stumped every expert on the planet. The pumping stations that supplied fresh water to the surface cities had simply stopped working efficiently, as if the water itself had become reluctant to flow. "You discovered that the problem wasn't mechanical," Nerys continued. "It was biological. Microscopic organisms had formed colonies in the filter systems, not blocking the flow, but changing its characteristics in ways that made the pumps work against themselves instead of with the water's natural tendency to flow." "That's right," Finn said, remembering the months of frustration before he'd finally thought to examine the water itself, rather than just the machinery. The organisms weren't exactly parasites. They were more like symbionts that had gotten confused about their purpose. Once I figured out how to communicate with them, to convince them to work with the system instead of against it, the efficiency increased by 400%, Nerys finished. "And your reputation reached even the deep places, carried by currents that touch all waters." She paused, and her bioluminescent glow pulsed with what might have been hope. "This is why we need you, Keeper. Not just your technical knowledge, but your ability to listen to what the water is trying to tell you." Finn looked around his flooded workshop, at the impossible spiral of water that still danced in the air, at his niece whose eyes shone with the excitement of discovering something entirely new, at this alien queen who had literally emerged from his pipes to ask for help. It was insane. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of challenge that had driven him to become a plumber in the first place. The desire to solve problems that no one else could solve, to bring order to chaos, to make things work the way they were supposed to work. But there was something else, something Queen Nerys hadn't mentioned directly, but which hung in the air like the scent of approaching storms. If her people were dying, if their civilization was collapsing, then the consequences would reach far beyond their underwater cities. Aquatica Prime was a water world. Every system, every ecosystem, every form of life depended on the oceans that covered 90% of the planet's surface. If something was poisoning the deep waters, it would eventually poison everything. "My niece comes with me," he said finally. "Non-negotiable. She's the best systems analyst I know, and if we're dealing with hybrid biomechanical technology, I'll need her expertise." Nerys looked at Kara with those deep, alien eyes. The child would be welcome, though the deep places are not without their dangers. "Are you prepared for such a journey, young analyst?" Kara straightened, and Finn saw something in her expression that reminded him powerfully of her mother, a stubborn determination that brooked no arguments. "I've been preparing my whole life," she said. "Every algorithm I've written, every system I've analyzed, every late night spent dreaming about the perfect water treatment protocol. It's all been leading to this, hasn't it?" Nerys smiled, and this time the expression was unmistakably warm. "Perhaps it has, child. Perhaps the currents have been guiding you both toward this moment." She turned back to Finn. "But know this, Keeper. What I ask of you is not without risk. Those who have sabotaged our systems will not welcome interference. and the deep places hold secrets that surface minds were not meant to comprehend. Are you certain you wish to undertake this burden? Finn looked at his flooded workshop, at the tools he'd spent decades collecting and refining, at the life he'd built for himself and Kara in this small corner of a waterlogged world. It would have been easy to say no, to claim that he was just a simple plumber who wasn't equipped for such cosmic responsibilities. But the water was still singing in the pipes, still calling to him with voices that spoke of need and hope and desperate determination. "I'll need to bring some equipment," he said, "and we'll need to figure out how to get there without drowning." Queen Nerys laughed, and the sound was like waves breaking against a distant shore. "Drowning will not be a concern, Keeper. We have technologies for allowing air breathers to survive in the deep places. And as for equipment," she gestured, and the water column began to show new images. Workshops and laboratories filled with tools and materials beyond anything Finn had ever imagined. "The Coral Throne has resources at your disposal that will make your surface technologies seem primitive by comparison." As if to demonstrate, she reached into the water column and withdrew what looked like a wrench, but one made from some crystalline material that seemed to shift and flow even as it maintained its solid form. "Our tools are grown rather than forged," she explained, "shaped by will and necessity rather than heat and pressure. They adapt to their tasks, learning from each use, becoming more efficient with experience." Finn took the tool, marveling at its weight, or rather, its lack of weight. The wrench felt substantial in his hands, but seemed to adjust its mass and balance based on what he was trying to do with it. When he held it like a traditional wrench, it felt familiar and comfortable. When he shifted his grip experimentally, it flowed to accommodate the new position, its shape subtly altering to provide better leverage. "This is impossible," he muttered, but his tone was appreciative rather than skeptical. After a lifetime of working with stubborn tools that never quite fit the job at hand, the idea of equipment that could adapt itself was almost intoxicating. "Impossible is merely a word surface dwellers use to describe technologies they do not yet understand," Nerys said. "In the deep places, we have had millennia to explore the boundaries between the possible and the merely improbable." Her expression grew serious again. "But even our advanced technologies cannot solve the problem we face. That requires something else: intuition, creativity, the ability to see patterns where others see only chaos." Kara had been examining the schematics on her tablet, cross-referencing them with her database of terrestrial water treatment systems. "Uncle Finn," she said slowly, "I think I'm beginning to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. These purification systems, they're not just cleaning water. They're maintaining the entire oceanic ecosystem of this planet. If they fail completely, everything dies," Finn finished. "Not just Queen Nerys' people, but every living thing in the oceans. And on a water world like this one, that means the end of all life on Aquatica Prime," Nerys confirmed grimly. "This is why we have come to you, Keeper. This is why we are willing to risk everything on the expertise of a surface dweller who speaks to pipes as if they were living things." The weight of responsibility settled on Finn's shoulders like a lead blanket. He'd always known that plumbing was more important than most people realized. Civilization literally depended on clean water and functional sewage systems. But this was beyond anything he'd ever contemplated. The life of an entire world hung in the balance, and somehow, impossibly, it had all come down to his ability to fix a broken water treatment system. "When do we leave?" he asked. Queen Nerys smiled, and the phosphorescent patterns on her skin shifted to what might have been relief. "Now, if you're ready. Every moment we delay, more my people suffer. The toxins spread further. The damage becomes more difficult to reverse." Finn looked around his workshop one more time, memorizing the familiar chaos of tools and parts and half-finished projects. When he returned, if he returned, this might all seem like a dream, a fevered hallucination brought on by too many years breathing vaporized solvents and metal dust. But as he watched Kara pack her equipment with the methodical precision of someone preparing for the adventure of several lifetimes, he knew that whatever happened next would change everything. "Kara," he said softly, "you don't have to do this. You could stay here, stay safe." She looked up at him with an expression that was part exasperation, part affection, and entirely determined. "Uncle Finn," You taught me that water is life, and life is worth fighting for. If Queen Nerys is right, if her people die, then this whole world dies with them. How could I possibly stay safe while that happens? Nerys watched this exchange with interest, her alien features softening into something that might have been maternal affection. The child has wisdom beyond her years, she observed. She will be an asset in the deep places, where old knowledge must be paired with new insights to solve problems that have never been encountered before. As Finn gathered his most essential tools, the ones that had been with him longest, that had learned the peculiar harmonies of his working style, he found himself wondering what they would find in the depths of Aquatica Prime's oceans. The images Queen Nerys had shown them suggested a civilization of almost incomprehensible sophistication, but also one that was dying from within, poisoned by saboteurs whose motives remained unclear. Queen Nerys, he said as he secured his tool bag. Who would want to destroy your purification systems? What could anyone possibly gain from poisoning an entire world? Her expression darkened, and the bioluminescent patterns on her skin shifted to deeper, more ominous colors. That, Keeper, is perhaps the most troubling aspect of our situation. The sabotage is not random. It shows intimate knowledge of our systems, understanding that could only come from someone with access to our most closely guarded technical archives. We fear the threat comes from within. The implications of that statement hung in the humid air like a toxic cloud. If Queen Nerys was right, if the sabotage was indeed an inside job, then they weren't just dealing with a technical problem. They were walking into a political nightmare, a situation where the very people they were trying to help might also be the ones trying to stop them. Civil war. Kara asked bluntly. Perhaps, Nerys admitted, or something more complex. There are factions among my people who believe that our long isolation has made us weak, that we should expand beyond the deep places, claim dominion over the surface waters as well. They see the failing purifiers not as a crisis to be solved, but as an opportunity to force change. Finn frowned. But if the purifiers fail completely, there won't be anything left to rule over. The ocean ecosystems will collapse, and logic is not always the driving force behind political ambition, Nerys said sadly. There are those who would rather rule over a dying world than live as equals in a thriving one. These factions may see the crisis as a way to consolidate power, to eliminate opposition by allowing the old systems to fail and then rebuilding according to their own vision. It was a depressingly familiar pattern, one that Finn had seen play out on the surface world more times than he cared to remember. When systems failed, when people were afraid and desperate, there were always those ready to capitalize on the chaos for their own benefit. The difference here was the scale, not just a city or a nation, but an entire planet's worth of life hanging in the balance. Then we better get moving, he said grimly. The longer we wait, the more time they have to make things worse. Queen Nerys nodded and began to gesture in complex patterns that made the water column respond like a living thing. The images it had been showing faded, replaced by what looked like a transportation system of some kind, tubes of flowing water that seemed to stretch through the ocean depths like liquid highways. The deep currents will carry us to Nethistar, she explained. But first, you must be prepared for the journey. Surface dwellers cannot survive in the deep places without assistance, and the modifications required are significant. She reached into the water column again and withdrew what looked like a pair of masks, but made from the same flowing, adaptive material as the wrench she'd given Finn. The devices seemed to pulse with their own internal rhythm, and when she held them up to the phosphorescent light, he could see complex structures within, gill-like membranes, pressure regulation systems, and what appear to be neural interface components. These will allow you to breathe in the deep waters, Nerys explained, but they do more than simply process oxygen. They will also provide pressure equalization, thermal regulation, and most importantly, they will translate the bioelectrical fields that we use for much of our communication in the depths. Kara examined her mask with scientific fascination. Bioelectric fields? You mean you communicate through electrical impulses as well as verbal language? In the deep places, sound travels differently than it does in air, Nerys explained. What you call words are useful for simple concepts, but complex technical discussions require more bandwidth than acoustic communication can provide. We have learned to modulate our bioelectric fields to carry information, Thoughts, emotions, technical data, even sensory experiences can be shared directly from one mind to another. The implications were staggering. If they could interface directly with the alien technology, if they could experience the purification systems not just as external observers, but as integrated components, it would be like having a direct neural link to every pipe, every filter, every flow sensor in the system. Is it safe? Finn asked, though he was already reaching for his mask. The opportunity to truly understand alien technology from the inside out was worth almost any risk. As safe as we can make it, Nerys replied honestly. The interface will be limited. We cannot risk allowing surface minds full access to our neural networks. But you will be able to perceive our systems as we do, to feel the flow of water through biomechanical channels as if it were flowing through your own circulatory system. Finn slipped the mask over his face, feeling it conform to his features with unsettling intimacy. For a moment, nothing happened, and then the world exploded into sensation. He could feel water moving through pipes throughout the building, sense the pressure differentials that drove the flow, perceive the subtle chemical signatures that told him about the water's origin and composition. It was like gaining a new sense organ, one that revealed hidden aspects of reality that had always been there, but invisible to normal perception. Kara's gasp told him she was experiencing something similar, and when he looked at her, he could see her eyes wide with wonder behind her own mask. Through the bioelectric interface, he caught glimpses of her thoughts, amazement at the complexity of the sensory data, excitement at the possibilities it opened up, and underneath it all, a deep satisfaction at finally being able to perceive water systems the way she'd always dreamed of understanding them. Incredible, she whispered, and through the mask translation system, her words carried emotional undertones that normal speech could never convey. The pure joy of discovery, the intellectual hunger for more knowledge, the determination to use this new understanding to help solve the crisis they faced. Queen Nerys smiled at their reactions. Now you begin to understand why we believe you can help us where others have failed. With these interfaces, you will be able to perceive our purification systems not as alien technology, but as extensions of the same water systems you have spent your lives learning to understand. She gestured again, and the water column began to shift and flow, forming what looked like a transportation chamber around them. The journey to Nethy's Tar will take several hours, even through the deep currents. I suggest you use that time to familiarize yourselves with the sensory data the masks provide. The more comfortable you become with our ways of perceiving reality, the more effective you will be when we reach the dying city. As the water closed around them, Finn felt a moment of panic, the instinctive fear of drowning that no amount of rational knowledge could completely suppress. But the mask was already working, extracting oxygen from the water around him, regulating pressure and temperature, maintaining the delicate balance of chemistry that kept him conscious and alert. Within moments, breathing water felt as natural as breathing air, and he began to understand why Queen Nerys' people had been able to build such an advanced civilization in the ocean depths. The sensation of movement through the water was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. They weren't swimming exactly, nor were they being carried by mechanical propulsion. Instead, they seemed to be riding the water itself, flowing with currents that responded to Queen Nerys' will as if she were conducting an orchestra of liquid motion. Through the bioelectric interface, he could sense the vast network of currents that crisscrossed the planet's oceans, some natural, some artificial, all interconnected in a complex web that put the surface world's transportation systems to shame. As they traveled deeper, the water around them began to change. What had started as the familiar blue-green of shallow seas gradually darkened to deep blues and purples, and then to colors that had no names in any surface language. Bioluminescent creatures drifted past like living stars, their patterns of light carrying information that the mask translated into fragments of meaning. Territorial markers, mating displays, warnings of danger, songs of joy that transcended species boundaries. Your oceans are alive in ways we never imagined, Kara said, her voice filled with wonder. Through the bioelectric link, Finn could feel her mind working furiously to catalog and analyze everything they were seeing, building new frameworks of understanding that bridged the gap between terrestrial biology and alien technology. All waters are alive, Queen Nerys replied, but few surface dwellers learn to listen to what they have to say. Your uncle is unusual in that regard. His sensitivity to hydraulic systems comes from an intuitive understanding that water is not merely a medium, but a participant in every process it touches. They descended through layers of water that told the story of Aquatica Prime's history. Ancient geological formations visible in the dissolved minerals, chemical signatures of long-extinct volcanic activity, trace elements that spoke of cosmic impacts and climate changes spanning millions of years. It was like reading a book written in chemistry and pressure, geology and biology all intertwined in a narrative that made Finn's head spin with its complexity. And then, impossibly far below the surface, lights began to appear. At first, they looked like stars reflected in still water, distant and cold. But as they drew closer, the lights resolved into something far more magnificent. The illuminated spires of Nethys Tar, Queen Nerys' capital city, rising from the abyssal plains like a dream made manifest. The city stretched for miles in every direction, its towers and domes grown from living coral that had been shaped and guided over millennia into architectural forms of breathtaking beauty. But even at this distance, Finn could see that something was wrong. Many of the lights that should have bathed the city in warm bioluminescence were flickering or dark entirely. Sections of the coral structures showed signs of decay. Their vibrant colors faded to sickly yellows and grays. And through the bioelectric interface, he could sense the distress of the city's inhabitants, a low-level psychic anguish that spoke of a people watching their world die around them. The contamination spreads faster now, Queen Nerys said, and her mental voice carried a weight of sorrow that made Finn's chest ache in sympathy. Each day, we lose more of what took millennia to build. Soon, if nothing changes, Nethys Tar will be nothing but ruins on the ocean floor, and my people will be nothing but memories dissolved in poisoned water. As they approached the city's outskirts, Finn began to understand the true scope of the purification systems Queen Nerys had described. Massive biomechanical structures rose from the sea floor like technological mountains, their surfaces covered with what looked like a fusion of organic growth and crystalline circuitry. These were the great purifiers, the ancient machines that had maintained the delicate balance of ocean chemistry for countless generations. And they were clearly dying. The symbiotic organisms that should have been processing contaminants were sluggish and discolored. The crystalline matrices that regulated chemical reactions were clouded with deposits that interfered with their function. The mechanical components, pumps and filters and distribution systems, showed signs of systematic sabotage, their precision engineering corrupted by foreign elements that disrupted their carefully calibrated operations. "My God," Kara whispered, her scientific mind reeling at the complexity of what they were seeing. "Uncle Finn, this isn't just a water treatment system. It's an entire artificial ecosystem, designed to process and purify the water for an entire planet's worth of ocean life." Finn nodded grimly. Through the mass sensory enhancements, he could perceive the flow of water through the purification complex, feel the way toxins were building up in areas where the cleaning systems had failed, sense the growing imbalance that threatened to cascade throughout the entire oceanic ecosystem. It was like diagnosing a patient with multiple organ failure, where each failing system made the others work harder until the whole body collapsed. "The sabotage is sophisticated," he observed, studying the patterns of damage. "Whoever did this understood your systems intimately enough to target the most critical interdependencies. They're not just breaking individual components. They're disrupting the relationships between systems, making it impossible for the purifiers to compensate for damage." Queen Nerys' bioluminescent patterns shifted to what Finn was beginning to recognize as approval, mixed with grim satisfaction. "You see it," she said. "This is why we need your perspective, Keeper. Our own engineers focus on individual systems, attempting to repair each component in isolation. But you understand that the damage is systemic, that healing requires addressing the whole, not just the parts." As they entered the city proper, swimming through streets lined with structures that seemed to grow from the sea floor itself, Finn was struck by the beauty of what Queen Nerys' people had created. Every building was a work of art, shaped from living materials that responded to both function and aesthetic need. Gardens of kelp and coral created natural parks where strange and beautiful creatures lived in harmony with their urban environment. Transportation tubes carried citizens through the water on currents of precisely controlled flow, while markets and gathering spaces buzzed with activity despite the underlying current of worry that pervaded the city. But everywhere, the signs of decline were evident. Gardens that should have been lush with growth were sparse and yellowing. Citizens moved with the sluggish exhaustion of chronic poisoning. The very water itself felt wrong against Finn's skin, thick with contaminants that his enhanced senses could identify, but not eliminate. They arrived at the coral throne itself, a palace grown from a single massive reef that had been shaped over generations into a structure of impossible beauty and complexity. Queen Nerys led them through chambers where walls of living coral displayed information in patterns of light and color, where fountains of pure water sang with harmonies that carried technical data encoded in acoustic frequencies, where the very architecture seemed to pulse with the rhythm of a vast organic intelligence. "Your Majesty," a voice called as they entered what appeared to be a command center. Finn turned to see another of Queen Nerys' people approaching. This one male, with skin that shifted between deep green and gold, and bioelectric patterns that conveyed urgent concern. "The situation in Sector 7 has deteriorated further. We've lost 3 more purification nodes, and the contamination is spreading toward the nursery districts." Queen Nerys' patterns flashed with what Finn now recognized as controlled anger. "How many of our people have been affected?" "Nearly 200 in the last cycle alone," the male replied. "The healers are doing what they can, but without clean water to work with." He gestured helplessly, his bioelectric field radiating frustration and grief. "Commander Thane," Queen Nerys said formally, "I present the surface dwellers I told you about. Finn Morrison, the one they call the Hydro Tinker, and his niece Kara, a systems analyst of considerable skill. Keeper, Commander Thane oversees our technical maintenance divisions." Thane's bioelectric field shifted to what might have been skeptical hope as he examined the 2 humans floating in the chamber. "Your Majesty, with respect, surface dwellers know nothing of our systems. How can they possibly succeed where our own experts have failed?" It was a fair question, and Finn found himself wondering the same thing. But as he studied the display surrounding them, complex visualizations of water flow, contamination patterns, and system status reports, he began to see connections that the alien engineers might have missed. The sabotage wasn't random. It followed patterns that were familiar to anyone who'd spent years troubleshooting complex plumbing systems. "Commander," Finn said slowly, his mind racing as pieces began to fall into place, "show me the timeline of failures. Not just when systems went down, but the sequence, the order in which different components were compromised." Thane's bioelectric field flickered with surprise, but he gestured to one of the coral displays. Immediately, the chamber filled with a 3-dimensional map of the purification network, with failures highlighted in pulsing red. As Finn watched, the timeline began to play out, showing how the sabotage had spread through the system over time. "There," Kara said suddenly, her enhanced perception allowing her to process the visual data with machine-like precision. "Uncle Finn, do you see it? The pattern isn't geographic, it's hydraulic." Finn nodded grimly. She was right. The sabotage hadn't spread outward from central points like a conventional attack. Instead, it had followed the flow of water itself, targeting critical junctions where contamination would be carried downstream to affect the maximum number of secondary systems. "Whoever did this thinks like a plumber," he said. "They understand hydraulic engineering well enough to know that you don't need to destroy every component. You just need to identify the key pressure points where small amounts of damage can cascade through the entire network." Commander Thane's bioelectric patterns shifted to something that might have been grudging respect. "You see something our own analysts missed." "Not missed," Finn corrected diplomatically. "But your people think in terms of biological systems, living networks that can adapt and compensate for damage. This sabotage was designed by someone who understands mechanical principles, pressure, flow, the physics of fluid dynamics. They're using your own system's flexibility against it." Queen Nerys moved closer to the display, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through colors that spoke of intense concentration. "Explain, Keeper. How can flexibility become a weakness?" Finn gestured to the flowing patterns of contamination spreading through the network. "Your purification systems are designed to route around damage, right? If one component fails, the water finds alternate pathways, and other components work harder to compensate. Of course, Thane said, it is the fundamental principle of resilient design. No single point of failure can bring down the entire network. But that's exactly what makes it vulnerable, Kara interjected, her understanding catching up with her uncle's analysis. If you know the system will reroute around damage, you can predict where the increased load will go. Then you sabotage those secondary pathways, forcing the system to reroute again. And again, and again, Finn finished, until you've overloaded the few remaining functional components past their breaking point. It's like creating a hydraulic cascade failure. Each reroute makes the next failure more likely, until the whole system collapses from the inside out. The chamber fell silent, except for the whispered harmonies of water flowing through hidden channels. Commander Thane's bioelectric field had shifted to what Finn was learning to recognize as shock comprehension. If you are correct, the commander said slowly, then our repair efforts have been making the situation worse. Every time we restore a damaged component, we're simply creating a new target for sabotage. While the underlying vulnerabilities remain unaddressed, Queen Nerys finished grimly. We have been treating symptoms instead of the disease itself. She turned to Finn with an expression that mixed hope and desperation. Can it be reversed? Can the cascade be stopped? Finn studied the contamination patterns for several long moments, his mind working through the hydraulic engineering problems like a three-dimensional puzzle. Maybe, he said finally, but it won't be easy. We need to completely rethink how the purification network operates. Instead of trying to repair the damage, we need to redesign the flow patterns to bypass the compromised sections entirely. That would require shutting down major portions of the network, Thane objected. The contamination levels would spike beyond survivable limits. Not if we're smart about it, Kara said, her fingers flying over her tablet as she began running calculations. Uncle Finn, what if we use temporary bypass systems? Portable purification units that could maintain life support while we reroute the main network. Finn's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement he usually reserved for particularly challenging repair jobs. Bypass surgery for a planetary circulatory system, he murmured. It's crazy enough that it might actually work. Queen Nerys' patterns brightened with something that looked very much like hope. What would you need, Keeper? What resources, what assistance? First, I need to see the contamination source, Finn replied. If we're going to stop this cascade, we need to understand exactly what was introduced into your system and how it's spreading. Then, he paused, considering the magnitude of what they were proposing. Then we need to essentially perform surgery on a living planet. We'll need every engineer you have, plus manufacturing capacity for the bypass systems, plus. He trailed off as the scope of the project truly hit him. Plus a way to do all of this without alerting whoever is responsible for the sabotage, Kara added quietly. If they realize what we're planning, they'll just accelerate their timeline. Commander Thane's bioelectric field pulsed with grim agreement. The child speaks wisdom. We have suspected for some time that the saboteur has access to our planning councils. Too many of our repair efforts have been countered before they could be implemented. Queen Nerys was quiet for a long moment, her patterns cycling through colors that spoke of difficult decisions being weighed. There is a place, she said finally, deep beneath the city, where the original purifiers were built. Few know of its existence, and fewer still have access. If you're to understand the true nature of our systems, and the extent of the contamination, it is there you must go. She gestured, and new images appeared in the coral displays. Ancient chambers carved from living rock, filled with technology that seemed to blur the lines between organism and machine even more than what they had already seen. These were the first purifiers, the prototypes from which the entire planetary system had grown, and they looked like nothing so much as the heart of some vast organism. The deep archives, Thane breathed, his bioelectric field shifting to what might have been awe. Your Majesty, those chambers have been sealed for 3,000 years. The knowledge contained there will either save us or confirm that we are beyond saving. Queen Nerys finished. Keeper, what you will see in the deep archives represents the accumulated wisdom of our people's greatest engineers, preserved from the time when Nethy's Tar was nothing but a dream in the minds of visionaries. But be warned, the knowledge contained there is not easily processed by minds unprepared for it. Finn exchanged glances with Kara, seeing his own mixture of excitement and apprehension reflected in her eyes. They were being offered access to technology that was quite literally beyond human comprehension, but they were also walking deeper into a political situation that could get them killed if they chose the wrong allies. "We'll need to bring our own equipment," he said finally. "The diagnostic tools, the pressure sensors, some of the portable testing gear. Your technology is incredible, but I'll work better with instruments I understand." "Of course," Queen Nerys agreed. "But Keeper, once you enter the deep archives, there will be no turning back. What you learn there will make you a threat to those who seek to control the crisis for their own ends. Are you prepared for that burden?" Finn thought about his flooded workshop on the surface, about the simple life he'd built fixing pipes and solving hydraulic puzzles for people who rarely understood how complex their water systems really were. Then he thought about the dying city around them, about the millions of lives that hung in the balance, about the possibility that this beautiful underwater civilization might simply end. "I've been a plumber for 30 years, he said quietly. "I've never walked away from a job that needed doing, no matter how complicated or dangerous it got. I'm not about to start now." Queen Nerys smiled, and her bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors that spoke of gratitude and determination. "Then we go to the deep archives. Commander Thane, prepare a security detail. We must assume that our movements are being watched." As they prepared to descend even further into the depths of Aquatica Prime's oceans, Finn found himself wondering what exactly they would find in those ancient chambers. The technology they'd already seen was miraculous enough, but Queen Nerys' warnings suggested that the deep archives contained knowledge that was actively dangerous to unprepared minds. The journey to the archives took them through sections of the city that seemed increasingly ancient, where the coral structures showed signs of being grown rather than built, shaped by techniques that predated recorded history. The water itself felt different here, thicker, more alive, charged with energies that made Finn's enhanced senses tingle with warnings he couldn't quite interpret. The deep archives were created during the first flowering, Queen Nerys explained as they descended through a vertical shaft that seemed to stretch down forever. "When my people first learned to shape living matter to serve our needs, to blur the boundaries between organism and machine. The knowledge preserved there. It represents the culmination of 10,000 years of research into the fundamental nature of life itself. They passed through security barriers that weren't quite mechanical and weren't quite biological, fields of energy that seemed to scan not just their physical forms but their intentions, their very souls." Finn felt the barriers probe his mind, examining his motivations, his commitment to the task at hand, his willingness to sacrifice his own safety for the greater good. And then, finally, they emerged into a chamber that defied every law of physics Finn thought he understood. The deep archives were vast beyond comprehension, their walls disappearing into darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. But it wasn't the size that took his breath away, it was the technology. The first purifiers weren't machines in any sense he could understand. They were living structures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human mind could process, their surfaces covered with patterns that hurt to look at directly. "By all the waters," Kara whispered, her enhanced senses clearly overwhelmed by what they were seeing. "Uncle Finn, this isn't just biomechanical technology. It's something else entirely. It's like they found a way to encode information directly into the fabric of reality itself." Indeed, the chamber was filled with more than just physical structures. Knowledge hung in the water like a tangible presence. Mathematical theorems that existed as living entities, engineering principles that could be felt rather than merely understood, solutions to problems that hadn't been posed yet encoded in the very architecture of the space. The first engineers understood that information and matter are simply different expressions of the same fundamental force, Queen Nerys explained, her own bioelectric pattern subdued in the presence of such ancient power. They learned to think reality into new configurations, to solve problems by convincing the universe to operate according to different rules. Finn approached one of the first purifiers with the reverence he might have shown in a cathedral. Up close, he could see that its surface wasn't solid in any conventional sense. Patterns of energy and matter flowed through it like slow-motion lightning, carrying information at speeds that made his enhanced perception struggle to keep up. But as he watched, something familiar began to emerge from the chaos. Underneath all the impossible technology, underneath the reality-bending engineering, he could sense the fundamental hydraulic principles that govern the machine's operation. Water in, contaminants out, balance maintained through feedback loops that monitored everything from molecular composition to quantum field fluctuations. It's still plumbing, he said wonderingly. Incredibly advanced, impossibly sophisticated plumbing, but plumbing nonetheless. The water still has to flow from here to there, still has to be cleaned and balanced and distributed. The principles are the same, just implemented at a level I can barely comprehend. Queen Nerys' patterns brightened with surprise. You can understand it. The knowledge contained in the first purifiers has been sealed for millennia, because our own engineers found it too alien to process. I can understand the basics, Finn corrected. The hydraulic engineering underneath, all the impossible stuff. And that might be enough. He turned to Kara, who was studying her tablet with intense concentration. What are your sensors telling you about the contamination? Kara's expression was grim as she shared her findings. It's worse than we thought, Uncle Finn. The toxins aren't just interfering with the purification systems. They're actually learning from them. Every time the system adapts to filter out the contamination adapts right back. It's like we're dealing with a virus that's specifically designed to attack water treatment technology. The implications hit Finn like a physical blow. If the contamination was adaptive, if it could evolve faster than the purification systems could compensate, then conventional repair methods would be worse than useless. They'd actually accelerate the system's collapse by providing the contamination with new targets to adapt to. Show me, he said grimly. Kara's tablet projected a three-dimensional model of the contamination at the molecular level, and what Finn saw made his blood run cold. The toxins weren't just chemicals. They were self-replicating nanoscale machines, designed to infiltrate and subvert any cleaning system they encountered. Worse, they were clearly artificial, built with an understanding of both organic and mechanical engineering that rivaled anything he'd seen in the deep archives. This is military technology, he said quietly. Weapons-grade nanotechnology designed specifically to attack water treatment systems. Whoever created this isn't just trying to sabotage your purifiers. They're trying to make it impossible for anyone to ever build effective water treatment again. Commander Thane's bioelectric field flashed with what could only be described as rage. A weapon designed to destroy the foundation of all aquatic civilization. But who would create such a thing? And why? Before anyone could answer, new alarms began sounding throughout the archives. Not the mechanical klaxons Finn was familiar with, but harmonic tones that spoke directly to the enhanced perception provided by their masks. The contamination levels in the upper city were spiking. The remaining purification systems were failing faster than ever. And raiders, Queen Nerys said grimly, her patterns shifting to colors that spoke of immediate danger. Surface pirates, attacking the outer districts. They must be creating confusion to mask some other operation. But Finn was studying the contamination readings with growing horror. The timing wasn't coincidental. The raiders were attacking at precisely the moments when the adaptive toxins were adapting to new countermeasures, accelerating the cascade failure beyond any natural progression. They're not just raiding, he said urgently. They're coordinating with the saboteurs. Every attack is timed to maximize the damage to your purification systems. The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture of conspiracy that extended far beyond simple political maneuvering within Queen Nerys' government. Someone was coordinating a multi-pronged attack designed to collapse the entire oceanic ecosystem, and they had resources that suggested backing from off-world interests. We need to get back to the surface, Kara said suddenly. Uncle Finn, if they're using the raids to mask sabotage operations, then they're probably targeting the backup systems we'll need for the bypass surgery. We have to stop them before they eliminate our last options. Queen Nerys was already moving, her bioelectric patterns cycling through command frequencies that would alert her security forces. But as they prepared to leave the deep archives, Finn found himself taking one last look at the first purifiers, those impossible machines that had maintained the balance of an entire world for thousands of years. Somewhere in their reality-bending technology lay the key to stopping the adaptive contamination. He was sure of it. but understanding that technology well enough to use it, that would require insights that no surface dweller had ever possessed. Unless Queen Nerys, he called as they reached the exit to the archives. The knowledge in those machines. Is there a way to access it directly? To interface with the first purifiers the way we interface with your communication systems? She paused, her patterns cycling through colors that spoke of profound uncertainty. It is possible, she said slowly. But Keeper, the knowledge contained in the first purifiers is not merely information. It is living thought, consciousness that has been preserved for millennia. To interface with it directly is to risk having your mind changed in ways that cannot be undone. Finn looked back at the ancient machines, at the patterns of light and energy that encoded solutions to problems he was only beginning to understand. The raiders were attacking above, the contamination was spreading through the city, and millions of lives hung in the balance. Sometimes, a plumber had to risk everything to fix what was broken. How do we do it? He asked. The journey back through the city revealed the true scope of the crisis they faced. Entire districts were now dark, their bioluminescent gardens dead or dying from contamination exposure. Citizens moved through the water with the sluggish desperation of people who knew their world was ending, but had no idea how to stop it. The raiders, surface-dwelling pirates in mechanical suits, were systematically attacking infrastructure nodes, but not randomly. They were targeting the exact locations where emergency repairs might have provided temporary relief from the cascade failure. Coordinated, Commander Thane growled as his security teams engaged the raiders in running battles through the coral canyons. They know our systems better than they should. This intelligence could only come from someone with access to our most classified technical archives. Queen Nerys' patterns flickered with the deep pain of betrayal confirmed. Then we truly do face treachery from within. Someone among my own advisors, my own engineers, has provided our enemies with the knowledge needed to destroy us. They reached the main purification complex to find it under heavy attack. The raiders weren't trying to capture the facility. They were methodically destroying the backup systems that might have allowed for emergency repairs. Worse, they were introducing more of the adaptive contamination directly into the water supply, accelerating the cascade failure beyond any hope of conventional repair. Finn watched the battle with growing desperation. Every backup system destroyed, every emergency protocol compromised, narrowed their options for stopping the crisis. Soon, the only choice would be between watching the city die slowly from contamination or attempting the direct interface with the first purifiers that Queen Nerys had warned might cost him his sanity. Uncle Finn, Kara said urgently, her tablet displaying readings that made his enhanced senses recoil in horror. The contamination isn't just adapting anymore, it's evolving. The nanotechnology is rewriting itself faster than our sensors could track. At this rate, it'll be immune to any possible countermeasure within hours. The raiders pressed their attack with mechanical precision, their suits allowing them to operate in the deep water as effectively as Queen Nerys' own people. But as Finn watched their tactics, he began to notice something that made his plumber's instincts scream warnings. They're not just destroying the backup systems, he realized. They're rerouting the water flow through specific channels. Kara, look at the hydraulic patterns. They're hurting the contamination towards something. Kara's fingers flew over her tablet, correlating the attack patterns with the flow dynamics of the surrounding area. Her face went pale as the implications became clear. The main distribution nexus, she whispered. If the contamination reaches the central pumping station, it'll be distributed to every remaining clean district in the city within hours. Uncle Finn, they're not just trying to destroy the purification systems. They're trying to poison everyone at once. Queen Nerys' bioluminescent patterns flared with desperate determination. Commander Thane, all available forces to the distribution nexus. We must hold that position at any cost. But even as the order went out, Finn could see that it might not be enough. The raiders had planned their assault perfectly, timing their attacks to coincide with the cascade failure to maximize confusion and minimize effective response. The distribution nexus was already under assault, and the defenders were falling back under concentrated fire. There's another way, he said suddenly. Queen Nerys, can you get me back to the deep archives? If I can interface with the first purifiers directly, learn how they were designed to handle adaptive threats, Keeper, the risk is less than the certainty of extinction if we do nothing, Finn interrupted. The contamination is evolving faster than we can respond. Our only chance is to access knowledge that was designed to handle problems we haven't even thought of yet. Queen Nerys stared at him for a long moment, her patterns cycling through colors that spoke of difficult choices and desperate hopes. Very well, she said finally, but you will not go alone. If the interface destroys your mind, someone must be there to pull you back before the knowledge consumes you entirely. The return journey to the deep archives felt like a descent into madness. The water around them was increasingly toxic, filled with adaptive nanomachines that probed their masks and equipment with mechanical curiosity. Twice, they had to fight off raider patrols that seemed to appear from nowhere, their mechanical suits equipped with weapons that could disrupt bioelectric fields and cause excruciating pain to Queen Nerys' people. But finally, they stood once again before the first purifiers, those impossible machines that encoded the fundamental secrets of reality manipulation. Finn approached the largest of the devices, feeling the patterns of energy that surrounded it like standing in the eye of a hurricane. "How do I connect?" he asked. Queen Nerys gestured to what appeared to be a depression in the machine surface, though Finn's enhanced perception told him it was actually a dimensional fold that existed partly outside normal space-time. "Place your hand there," she said quietly, "and prepare yourself for knowledge that was never meant for minds bound by linear time." Finn pressed his palm against the interface and immediately felt his consciousness torn apart and rebuilt in configurations that should have been impossible. Information flooded his mind, not just data, but living concepts that rewrote his understanding of reality at the most fundamental level. He saw how the first engineers had learned to think matter into new configurations, how they had convinced the universe to operate according to different rules, how they had built machines that existed as much in the realm of pure thought as in physical space. And in that flood of impossible knowledge, he found what he was looking for. The solution to adaptive contamination wasn't to fight it directly. It was to change the rules under which adaptation operated. The first purifiers didn't just clean water. They maintained the fundamental stability that allowed cleaning to be possible in the first place. They created zones of reality where certain types of change simply couldn't occur, where evolutionary pressure itself could be redirected or neutralized. But accessing that knowledge came with a price. Finn felt his human consciousness stretching, threatening to snap under the weight of concepts that required a non-linear understanding of causality. He was becoming something other than human, gaining insights that would forever separate him from the simple existence he'd known before. "Finn," Kara's voice cut through the storm of knowledge like an anchor, reminding him of who he was and why he was here. "Uncle Finn, the readings are going crazy. Whatever you're doing, it's affecting the water throughout the entire city." Indeed, as Finn integrated the knowledge from the first purifiers, he could feel his understanding of hydraulic systems expanding beyond anything he'd ever imagined. He could perceive the flow of water not just through pipes and channels, but through the quantum foam that underlay reality itself. He could sense the ways that information and matter interacted, how consciousness could be used to guide physical processes, how a plumber who truly understood his craft could become something approaching a force of nature. With growing confidence, he began to apply his new understanding to the contamination crisis. The adaptive nanomachines were indeed learning and evolving, but they were doing so according to rules that could be changed. If he could create zones of stability around the remaining purification systems, areas where the contamination couldn't adapt or evolve, then the natural cleaning processes could begin to reassert themselves. But first, he had to stop the immediate threat, the contamination that was even now flowing toward the main distribution nexus, carrying with it the promise of total system collapse. Finn opened his awareness to the entire water system of Nethys Tar, feeling the flow of liquid through every pipe, every channel, every biological processing organ in the vast network. With his enhanced understanding, he could perceive the contamination as a living system, could trace its evolution in real time, could predict where it would adapt next. And then, drawing on knowledge that had been ancient when Queen Nerys' civilization was young, he began to change the rules. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the city, the adaptive contamination suddenly found itself unable to evolve, trapped in configurations that made it vulnerable to the natural cleaning processes that had been overwhelmed by its rapid adaptation. The cascade failure slowed, stopped, and began to reverse as systems that had been failing for months suddenly remembered how to work properly. But the effort of maintaining those zones of stability was enormous, requiring a level of concentration that pushed Finn's transformed consciousness to its limits. He could feel his sense of individual identity beginning to dissolve into the vast flow of water and information that connected every part of Aquatica Prime's oceanic ecosystem. "Uncle Finn," Kara's voice again, urgent with fear. "Your readings are off the charts. Whatever you're doing, it's burning out your neural pathways." Through his connection to the water systems, Finn could sense the battle raging at the distribution nexus. The raiders were pressing their attack with desperate fury, knowing that their window of opportunity was closing as the contamination crisis resolved itself. But Commander Thane's forces were holding, buying precious time for the purification systems to stabilize. With a supreme effort of will, Finn began to withdraw from the interface with the first purifiers, carefully extracting his consciousness from the flood of impossible knowledge. But even as he did so, he retained enough of his enhanced understanding to design a permanent solution to the contamination crisis. "Kara," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion, "I need you to input these specifications into the city's manufacturing systems. We're going to build something that's never existed before, a hybrid purification network that combines our understanding of mechanical engineering with our mastery of biological systems." As his consciousness fully returned to his merely human form, Finn found himself changed in ways that would take years to fully understand. He could still perceive water systems with enhanced clarity, could still sense the subtle relationships between pressure and flow that normal engineers missed. But more importantly, he now understood that the boundary between living and non-living systems was far more permeable than anyone had previously realized. The specifications he dictated to Kara were unlike anything that had ever been built. Purification systems that could learn and adapt like biological organisms, but were anchored to zones of stability that prevented runaway evolution. They would be immune to the kind of adaptive contamination that had nearly destroyed Nethy's tar, while remaining flexible enough to handle new challenges as they arose. "It's beautiful," Kara whispered as she studied the designs. "Uncle Finn, this isn't just engineering. It's like you found a way to teach machines to have immune systems." Indeed, that was exactly what he had done. The new purification network would be able to recognize and neutralize adaptive threats automatically, without requiring the kind of constant manual intervention that had made the original systems vulnerable to sabotage. But implementing the new designs would require resources and time that they might not have. Even as the immediate contamination crisis stabilized, the raiders were regrouping for a final assault on the distribution nexus. If they succeeded in introducing more adaptive contamination into the water supply, even Finn's enhanced understanding might not be enough to save the city. "Queen Nerys," he said urgently, "we need to end this battle quickly. Every moment the raiders remain in your city increases the risk that they'll find a way to counter our solution." The Queen's bioluminescent patterns flickered with grim determination. "Then we must take the fight to them directly. Commander Thane, prepare for a coordinated assault on all raider positions simultaneously. We end this now, before they can regroup." The final battle for Nethy's tar was unlike anything Finn had ever witnessed. Queen Nerys' forces moved through the water with fluid grace, their bioelectric fields coordinating attacks with a precision that made human military tactics seem crude by comparison. The raiders fought back with mechanical fury, their suits providing them with firepower and protection that should have made them nearly invincible. But they hadn't counted on Finn's new understanding of the water systems themselves. Drawing on his enhanced perception, Finn began to manipulate the flow patterns throughout the city, creating currents that carried Queen Nerys' forces into optimal attack positions, while simultaneously trapping the raiders in hydraulic dead zones where their mechanical advantages were neutralized. It was like conducting an orchestra where every instrument was a flowing stream, every note a precisely directed current of water. The raiders found themselves caught in a three-dimensional maze of currents that seemed to actively work against them, carrying them away from their targets while bringing defenders directly to their positions. Their coordination broke down as communication became impossible in the chaotic flow patterns, and one by one, their positions were overrun. But even as the battle raged, Finn detected something that made his enhanced senses scream with alarm. Deep beneath the city, someone was attempting to access the deep archives. Not through the authorized channels Queen Nerys had used, but by brute force, using technology that felt alien even to his transformed perception. The saboteur, he realized. They're making their move while we're distracted by the raiders. Without hesitation, Finn began to dive toward the archives, his understanding of water dynamics allowing him to move through the liquid environment with unprecedented speed. But even as he descended, he could sense that whoever was attempting to breach the ancient chambers possessed knowledge that rivaled his own, knowledge that shouldn't have existed outside the archives themselves. He arrived at the deep archives to find a figure in an advanced environmental suit methodically dismantling the security barriers that protected the first purifiers. But this wasn't one of the surface raiders. The technology they were using was clearly of local origin, modified with innovations that spoke of intimate familiarity with Queen Nerys' systems. "Commander Thane," Finn whispered into his communicator. "The saboteur is here, in the archives. And I think it's one of your own people." Indeed, as the figure turned to face him, Finn could see through the suit's transparent faceplate to the features of one of Queen Nerys' own engineers. Someone who had been present at their briefings, who had access to the most classified information about the purification systems. "So," the saboteur said, their voice carrying the distinctive harmonics of Queen Nerys' species, "the surface dweller thinks he can interfere with plans that have been generations in the making." Finn felt his enhanced understanding probe the saboteur's equipment, recognizing modified versions of the same biomechanical interfaces he had used to access the first purifiers. But whereas modifications have been designed to enhance understanding, these have been twisted to extract and weaponize the ancient knowledge. "Why?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "Why destroy your own civilization?" The saboteur laughed, a sound like grinding metal transmitted through water. "Destroy? You understand nothing, surface dweller. We are not destroying our civilization. We are evolving it. The old ways, the stagnant traditions that have bound us to these deep places for millennia, they must be swept away to make room for something greater." As they spoke, Finn could see the saboteur's equipment beginning to interface with the first purifiers, but not to access their knowledge, to corrupt it. They were introducing the same adaptive contamination technology into the ancient machines themselves, threatening to turn the source of all hydraulic wisdom into a weapon against the very concept of stable water systems. "The surface worlds have technologies we have never dreamed of," the saboteur continued. "Star-spanning civilizations, weapons that can reshape reality itself. But they will never share those technologies with primitives who hide in ocean depths, content to maintain the same systems for thousands of years without innovation or growth." The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. The sabotage hadn't been random terrorism or even political revolution. It had been an attempt to force Queen Nerys' civilization into contact with galactic powers by creating a crisis so severe that off-world intervention would be inevitable. "You're willing to commit genocide for the chance at advanced technology?" Finn asked, horrified. "Genocide?" The saboteur's laughter grew harsher. "I am ensuring our species' survival. Better to lose half our population and gain access to galactic civilization than to slowly decline in isolation until we become extinct through our own stagnation." But even as the saboteur spoke, Finn could sense their plan beginning to unravel. The adaptive contamination they were introducing into the first purifiers was encountering the zones of stability he had created earlier, finding itself unable to evolve or adapt in the ways necessary to corrupt the ancient knowledge. "It's not working," he said with growing confidence. "Your contamination can't affect the first purifiers while the stability zones are active." The saboteur's bioelectric patterns flared with frustrated rage. "Then I will simply have to eliminate the source of those zones." They turned toward Finn with weapons that seemed to blur the line between technology and living tissue, devices that could disrupt bioelectric fields and cause instant death to anyone dependent on the enhanced perception provided by Queen Nerys' masks. But Finn's transformation in the archives had changed him in ways that even he didn't fully understand. His consciousness was no longer entirely contained within his physical form. Part of him existed now in the flow patterns of water itself, distributed throughout the vast network of pipes and channels that connected every part of the city. When the saboteurs' weapons struck him, they found not a target that could be simply destroyed, but a consciousness that existed as much in the realm of flowing water as in flesh and blood. The attack dispersed through the water systems like ripples on a pond, diluted and harmless. Impossible, the saboteur breathed. Not impossible, Finn replied, his voice now carrying harmonics that spoke directly to the water around them. Just a different way of understanding what's possible. Drawing on his transformed consciousness, Finn began to turn the saboteurs' own equipment against them. The biomechanical interfaces they had used to try to corrupt the first purifiers suddenly found themselves subject to the same stability zones that protected the ancient machines. Their adaptive contamination technology locked into configurations that made it harmless, while their weapons systems simply stopped working. The old knowledge and the new, Finn said as he approached the now helpless saboteur. That's what your people need. Not replacement of one with the other, but integration of both into something greater than either could achieve alone. The saboteur's bioelectric patterns flickered with what might have been confusion. You cannot understand. You are a surface dweller, bound by primitive thinking. I'm a plumber, Finn corrected gently. And I've learned that the best solutions come from understanding how different systems can work together, not from forcing one to replace another. He gestured toward the first purifiers, their impossible geometry still pulsing with ancient wisdom. Your ancestors didn't build these machines to keep your people isolated. They built them to provide a foundation stable enough to support any kind of growth or change your civilization might need. As he spoke, Finn could sense Queen Nerys and Commander Thane approaching through the water above. The final battles against the raiders concluded with decisive victory for the defenders. But more importantly, he could feel the city's water systems beginning to stabilize as his hybrid purification network came online, cleaning and balancing the contaminated flow with efficiency that surpassed even the original first purifiers. The contamination is neutralized. Kara's voice came through his communicator, filled with wonder and relief. Uncle Finn, whatever you did to those systems, they're not just cleaning the water, they're actually improving it. The mineral balance, the dissolved oxygen levels, even the pH, everything is optimizing itself automatically. Indeed, the new purification network was performing beyond Finn's most optimistic projections. By combining his understanding of mechanical engineering with the biomechanical mastery of Queen Nerys' people, he had created something that was truly greater than the sum of its parts. A system that could learn and adapt like a living organism, while remaining anchored to principles that prevented runaway evolution or corruption. Queen Nerys entered the deep archives with her security forces, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through colors that spoke of relief, gratitude, and something that might have been awe as she observed the subdued saboteur. Engineer Keth, she said sadly, recognizing the figure in the environmental suit. You were among my most trusted advisors. Why betray everything we have built together? Keth's patterns flickered with defiant desperation. Because what we have built is a beautiful prison, Your Majesty. We have perfected the art of maintaining the status quo while the galaxy evolves around us. In another 1,000 years, we will be nothing but a curiosity, a primitive species that mastered water management, but never learned to reach for the stars. And you thought genocide was the answer? Commander Thane demanded, his bioelectric field radiating controlled fury. I thought crisis was the answer, Keth replied. A crisis severe enough to force contact with galactic civilization, to make them take notice of us and see us as potential allies rather than primitive savages content to hide in ocean depths. Queen Nerys was quiet for a long moment, her patterns cycling through colors that spoke of profound sadness. Keth, if you had come to me with these concerns, if you had proposed exploration missions, scientific exchanges, gradual integration with galactic civilization, you would have spent centuries debating the proposal in council, while our opportunity slipped away. Keth interrupted bitterly. Your Majesty, with respect, our government is designed for stability, not for bold action. Sometimes crisis is the only force capable of breaking through institutional inertia. Finn found himself studying the saboteur with something approaching sympathy. The desire for growth, for advancement, for connection with something larger than oneself. These were universal drives that he could understand. The methods were horrific, but the underlying motivation wasn't entirely wrong. What if there was another way? He asked suddenly. What if your people could have both stability and growth, tradition and innovation? Queen Nerys turned to him with surprise. Keeper, what do you propose? Finn gestured toward the new purification systems that were even now spreading throughout the city, their hybrid nature allowing them to incorporate innovations while maintaining the essential stability that kept the ecosystem functioning. The same principle that solved your contamination crisis could be applied to your entire civilization, he explained. Create zones of stability, core traditions and technologies that provide an unshakable foundation, while allowing zones of innovation where new ideas can be tested and developed safely. Kara's voice came through the communicator again, bright with excitement. Uncle Finn, that's brilliant. It's like creating a controlled environment for cultural evolution, stable enough to prevent chaos, flexible enough to allow genuine progress. Queen Nerys' patterns shifted to colors that spoke of intrigue consideration. You propose a fundamental restructuring of our society, Keeper. Such changes would take generations to implement. All the best plumbing jobs do, Finn replied with a slight smile. But once the foundation is properly laid, everything else becomes possible. He turned back to Keth, seeing something in the saboteur's bioelectro patterns that suggested the beginning of understanding. Your mistake wasn't wanting change. It was thinking that destruction was the only path to growth. But what if your people could have research expeditions to other worlds, scientific exchanges with galactic civilizations, exploration missions that expand your knowledge while maintaining the core systems that keep your people alive? Impossible, Keth said, but with less conviction than before. The galactic powers see us as primitives. They would never accept us as equals. Maybe not yet, Finn agreed. But what if you had something to offer them that they couldn't get anywhere else? What if your mastery of biomechanical integration, your understanding of how consciousness can guide physical processes, what if those technologies were exactly what galactic civilization needed to solve their own problems? Queen Nerys' patterns brightened with sudden comprehension. The hybrid systems you designed, Keeper, they represent principles that could revolutionize technology throughout the galaxy. The ability to create adaptive systems that remain stable, to bridge the gap between organic and mechanical engineering. Exactly, Finn said. Instead of forcing contact through crisis, you build relationships through mutual benefit. You become valuable enough that galactic civilization wants to work with you, not just study you. The chamber fell silent except for the harmonious flows of water through hidden channels. Keth's bioelectro patterns cycled through colors that spoke of thoughts being fundamentally restructured, worldviews being rebuilt from the ground up. It could work, the former saboteur said slowly. If we could demonstrate technologies that the galactic powers truly needed, if we could prove our value as allies rather than subjects, it will work, Queen Nerys said with growing confidence. But first, we must repair the damage that has been done. Engineer Keth, you will cooperate fully with our reconstruction efforts. Your intimate knowledge of the sabotage will be essential for ensuring that all contamination has been truly eliminated. Commander Thane's patterns flickered with skeptical concern. Your Majesty, can we trust him? After what he has done? He made a terrible mistake, Queen Nerys replied, but his motivations were not entirely selfish. If we can channel his desire for advancement into constructive paths, he may yet prove valuable to our people's future. Finn watched this exchange with growing appreciation for Queen Nerys' wisdom. The desire to punish betrayal was natural, but the willingness to transform enemies into allies was what separated true leaders from mere rulers. As they prepared to return to the upper city, Finn found himself taking one last look at the first purifiers, those impossible machines that had preserved ancient wisdom for countless millennia. His brief interface with their consciousness had changed him in ways he was still discovering, but more importantly, it had shown him possibilities he had never imagined. Queen Nerys, he said as they began their ascent, when this crisis is fully resolved, I'd like to propose a more formal exchange program. My people could learn from your biomechanical technologies, while your people could benefit from our mechanical engineering approaches. I would welcome such an arrangement, Keeper, she replied warmly. But know that you will always have a place among my people if you choose to remain. What you have accomplished here, it transcends the traditional boundaries between species, between ways of thinking. The return journey to the surface levels of Nethys Tar revealed the dramatic extent of their success. The hybrid purification systems were not only cleaning the contaminated water, but actually improving the overall health of the city's ecosystem. Gardens that had been dying for months were showing new growth. Citizens were moving with renewed energy, and the bioluminescent displays that decorated the coral architecture were brighter and more vibrant than they had been in years. More importantly, the new systems were proving their adaptive capabilities in real time. When Finn's sensors detected trace amounts of residual contamination in one district, the purification network automatically adjusted its processing parameters to eliminate the threat without requiring any manual intervention. It's like watching evolution in fast forward, Kara marveled as she studied the system's performance data. The network is learning from every challenge it encounters, becoming more efficient and more robust with each adaptation. But perhaps most significant was the change in the city's population. Word of the crisis's resolution had spread through the bioelectric communication networks faster than any formal announcement, and the resulting celebration was unlike anything Finn had ever witnessed. The very water around them seemed to dance with joy as millions of voices joined in harmonious frequencies that spoke of relief, gratitude, and hope for the future. Queen Nerys led them to the central plaza of the city, where the largest of the purification systems rose from the seafloor like a living mountain. The structure that had been failing just hours before now pulsed with healthy bioluminescence, its biomechanical components working in perfect harmony to maintain the delicate balance that made life possible in the deep waters. Citizens of Nethys Tar, Queen Nerys announced, her bioelectric voice carrying to every corner of the city. Today we have faced the greatest crisis in our recorded history, and we have emerged stronger than ever before. The systems that maintain our civilization have been not merely repaired, but fundamentally improved, ensuring that no similar threat can ever endanger our people again. The response was overwhelming, a symphony of bioelectric communication that conveyed emotions too complex for any single language to express. Gratitude, relief, pride, hope, and above all, a sense of unity that transcended the political divisions that had made the sabotage possible in the first place. But more than that, the Queen continued, we have learned that our greatest strength lies not in isolation, but in cooperation. The surface dwellers who came to our aid have shown us that different ways of thinking, different approaches to solving problems, can complement rather than replace our own traditions. She turned to Finn and Kara, her patterns brightening with formal recognition. Keeper Finn Morrison, Analyst Kara Morrison, by the authority of the Coral Throne and the acclaim of our people, I name you honorary citizens of Nethys Tar, with all the rights and privileges that such status conveys. But more than that, I offer you a permanent place among us, the opportunity to help guide our civilization as we begin a new era of growth and exploration. Finn felt the weight of the offer, the magnitude of what Queen Nerys was proposing. To remain in this underwater paradise, to spend his remaining years working with technologies that made human engineering seem primitive by comparison, to be part of a civilization that was poised to take its place among the stars. But as he looked at Kara, saw the wonder and excitement in her eyes, he realized that the choice wasn't just about what he wanted for himself. Your Majesty, he said carefully, the offer is incredibly generous, and I'm honored beyond words. But I think the most valuable thing we can do is serve as bridges between our peoples. Kara could establish a research station here, working with your engineers to develop new hybrid technologies, while I return to the surface to begin preparing for formal first contact protocols. Kara's face lit up with understanding and enthusiasm. A permanent exchange program, she breathed. Uncle Finn, that's perfect. I could spend 6 months here learning biomechanical engineering, then 6 months on the surface, sharing what I've learned with human researchers. Queen Nerys' patterns cycled through colors that spoke of pleased approval. Wisdom beyond your years, both of you. Yes, such an arrangement would benefit all our peoples far more than simple immigration could achieve. Commander Thane, who had been silent throughout the ceremony, stepped forward with his own proposal. "If I may, Your Majesty, I would like to volunteer to accompany Keeper Morrison to the surface world. Our people need to understand surface technologies as much as they need to understand ours." And so began what historians would later call the Great Integration, the first formal cooperation between Aquatica Prime surface and deep water civilizations. But more than that, it marked the beginning of a new chapter in galactic relations, as Queen Nerys' people began to share their revolutionary biomechanical technologies with other starfaring civilizations. The hybrid purification systems developed by Finn and Kara became the foundation for a new generation of life support technologies that could adapt to any environment while maintaining perfect stability. The consciousness-guided engineering principles they had discovered in the first purifiers revolutionized robotics and artificial intelligence throughout the galaxy. But perhaps most importantly, the crisis had demonstrated that the greatest advances came not from replacing old knowledge with new, but from finding ways to integrate different approaches into something greater than either could achieve alone. As Finn prepared for his return to the surface, he found himself standing once more before the great purification complex that had been the center of the crisis. The system that had nearly failed completely was now the heart of a network that maintained perfect water quality throughout the entire planetary ocean, while also serving as a model for similar systems on dozens of other worlds. "Not bad for a day's work," he murmured to himself, then laughed at the understatement. Kara approached, her arms filled with equipment and data storage devices that contained enough technological specifications to keep human engineers busy for decades. "Uncle Finn, are you sure about this? Leaving all this behind to go back to fixing broken pipes on the surface?" Finn smiled, feeling the familiar weight of his old tools in his hands alongside the impossible new instruments Queen Nerys' people had gifted him. "Kara, someone's got to prepare the surface world for what's coming. And besides," he looked out over the thriving city that stretched to the horizon in every direction. "I'll be back. Something tells me this old plumber's going to be in high demand once word gets out about what we've accomplished here." Indeed, as news of the Great Integration spread throughout galactic civilization, Finn found himself at the center of a revolution in engineering philosophy. The Morrison principles of adaptive stability became required study for engineers throughout the galaxy, while the biomechanical hybrid technologies developed in partnership with Queen Nerys' people transformed everything from spacecraft life support to planetary terraforming. But perhaps the greatest success was the transformation of Engineer Keth from saboteur to ally. The former terrorist became one of the most effective ambassadors for peaceful integration, using his deep understanding of both the old systems and the new possibilities to help other civilizations navigate their own transitions from isolation to galactic citizenship. The surface cities of Aquatica Prime were indeed unprepared for first contact, but Finn's reputation as the hydro tinker who had saved an entire world gave him the credibility needed to guide humanity through the cultural shock of learning they were not alone in the galaxy. His workshop became the unofficial embassy where human and alien engineers worked side by side to solve problems that neither species could handle alone. And through it all, the water continued to flow, carrying with it the songs of 1,000 different worlds, the stories of civilizations that had learned to work together instead of apart. The pipes in Finn's workshop still sang to him, but now their melodies included harmonies from across the galaxy. The voices of technologies and peoples united by the simple truth that the best solutions came from understanding rather than conquest, cooperation rather than domination. Years later, when historians analyze the factors that led to the peaceful integration of dozens of previously isolated civilizations, they consistently pointed to the same catalyst. The day a simple plumber named Finn Morrison looked at an impossible problem and decided that water was water, no matter how advanced the pipes that carried it. The water knew, as it always had. And finally, the people who depended on it had learned to listen. In the depths of Nethi's tar, the first purifiers continued their ancient work, their impossible geometries now enhanced with hybrid technologies that bridge the gap between organic and mechanical, between consciousness and matter. They maintained their vigil over the ocean world's life support systems while also serving as inspiration for a new generation of technologies that would carry their principles to the stars. The contamination crisis that had once threatened to destroy an entire civilization had become the catalyst for the greatest expansion of knowledge and cooperation in galactic history. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that Finn had always known, but that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The most complex problems often had the simplest solutions, if you knew how to listen to what the systems themselves were trying to tell you. The waters sang, and the galaxy learned to sing along. But this was not truly an ending, merely a transition from one phase of growth to another. For in the vast networks of flowing water that connected world to world, carried by ships that used biomechanical technologies originally developed in the depths of Aquatica Prime, new stories were beginning. New civilizations were learning to work together. New problems were being solved through cooperation rather than conflict, and new possibilities were opening that no single species could have imagined alone. The Hydro Tinker's greatest job was complete, but the work itself would continue for generations to come. Somewhere in the galaxy, pipes were singing with problems that needed solving, and engineers trained in the Morrison principles were learning to listen, to understand, and to bridge the gaps between different ways of thinking. Water was life, as Finn had always known. But now, finally, life had learned to flow like water, adaptive, persistent, finding a way through any obstacle, always seeking the level where different pressures could finally balance and work in harmony. The greatest plumbing job in galactic history was finished, and the universe would never be the same. In her underwater laboratory, Kara Morrison put the finishing touches on the latest iteration of biomechanical water treatment technology, systems that could think and feel and dream while still maintaining the fundamental stability that made life possible. Through the transparent walls of her research station, she could see the lights of Nethys Tar stretching to the horizon, a testament to what could be accomplished when different forms of intelligence learned to work together. On the surface, Commander Thane was presenting the latest engineering specifications to a council of human scientists, his alien perspective helping them see their own technologies in entirely new ways. The exchange program had become a permanent fixture of galactic civilization, with engineers from hundreds of worlds traveling to Aquatica Prime to study the principles of adaptive stability. And in a small workshop that had become legendary throughout the galaxy, an aging plumber named Finn Morrison carefully adjusted the flow in a pipe that carried water purified by technologies that spanned the stars. The water sang to him as it always had, but now its song included harmonies from 1,000 different worlds, each adding its own voice to the symphony of connected life. He smiled as he worked, knowing that somewhere in the vast network of flowing water that now connected most of the known galaxy, other plumbers, human and alien alike, were listening to the same songs, solving the same fundamental problems, maintaining the flow that made all life possible. The water knew, as it always had, and finally, the galaxy was learning to listen. The end.